The night was thick with tension, the streets of Harlem alive with the hum of its nightly pulse, the clink of glasses in the bars, the distant echoes of jazz, and the murmur of people moving through the shadows. But within the walls of a smoky, dimly lit backroom, something darker was brewing. Bumpy Johnson, the man who had carved out an empire in the heart of Harlem, was about to learn that the very forces that had helped him rise to power were now circling around him, plotting to take it all away. The door creaked open, and in walked a figure Bumpy had known all too well, a man from his past, someone who had once stood by his side but had now become a threat. The man's eyes were cold, calculating, but Bumpy could see the fear behind them. He was here to make a deal, one that would change everything. "You know why I'm here, Bumpy," the man said, his voice low but sharp. He took a seat across from Bumpy, his every movement measured, deliberate. Bumpy didn't respond immediately. He was studying the man before him, understanding that this wasn't just another conversation. It was a crossroads. A decision had to be made. The stakes were higher than ever before. "You've been getting too comfortable, Bumpy," the man continued, his gaze never wavering. "Too powerful. And in this game, power is never something you get to keep for long without a fight." Bumpy's eyes narrowed. "I built this empire. I control Harlem. You're not going to take that from me, not without a damn good reason." The man smiled, but it wasn't a smile of reassurance. It was the kind of smile a predator gives before it strikes. "That's the thing, Bumpy. It's not just me. The Mafia's been watching, and they've decided it's time for a change. They want a piece of Harlem, and if you want to keep what's yours, you're going to have to play by their rules." Bumpy leaned forward, his hand resting on the table, the tension in the room palpable. "And what if I don't?" The man's smile faded, replaced by the steely edge of reality. "Then you'll find out what happens when the big boys come to town." Bumpy Johnson's rise to power had been anything but ordinary. Born in 1905 in Charleston, South Carolina, he had seen the harsh realities of life at a young age. Moving to Harlem as a young man, Bumpy quickly learned the unspoken rules of the streets, rules that kept him alive and eventually made him untouchable. By 1929, Harlem was a neighborhood caught between worlds, one foot in the era of jazz and cultural renaissance, the other in the gritty underworld of crime and corruption. Bumpy, with his sharp mind and brutal determination, had taken control of the city's most lucrative criminal enterprises: gambling, the numbers racket, and even the bootlegging trade. But what truly set Bumpy apart from others in the business was his deep understanding of the balance of power. He didn't just rule with force, he ruled with a code of loyalty, respect, and above all, cunning. He was a man who could see the moves ahead, like a chess player anticipating his opponent's next move. However, Harlem was not just Bumpy's turf. It was a battleground for power, and in the shadows lurked the Mafia, an empire of their own, operating with its own ruthless rules. For years, Bumpy had kept them at bay, negotiating deals and maintaining a delicate balance. But the Mafia, like every other force in the criminal world, wasn't content with staying in the background forever. They had watched Bumpy's rise, and now they were ready to stake their claim. Harlem, at this moment in history, was a crossroads, a place of great change. The Jazz Age was in full swing, but the Great Depression loomed on the horizon. The streets were filled with ambition, but also with desperation. The political and social climate was shifting, and the gangsters who ran the streets had to adapt or perish. For Bumpy, this was more than just a fight for territory. It was a fight for control over his destiny, and the destiny of Harlem itself. The Mafia, with its vast resources and influence, was a force Bumpy knew he couldn't ignore. They were not just a rival, they were the ultimate challenge to his authority, to the empire he had built, and the stakes had never been higher. In the weeks that followed, the tension in Harlem escalated. The whispers of the Mafia's intentions were everywhere. in the bars, in the alleyways, and on every corner where men gathered to talk business. Bumpy had heard the rumors, but it wasn't until that meeting in the back room that the reality set in. The Mafia wasn't just a looming threat anymore, they were making their move. Bumpy knew that to protect his empire, he would have to face them head-on. But it wasn't going to be easy. The Mafia wasn't just another street gang, they were a well-oiled machine with connections running from New York to Chicago and beyond. They had money, they had muscle, and most importantly, they had a network of politicians, police officers, and businessmen who would do whatever it took to see Bumpy's empire crumble. At the heart of the Mafia's plan was Salvatore Big Sal DiCarlo, a man whose reputation for ruthlessness was known throughout the underworld. Big Sal had been the Mafia's point man in New York for years, and now he had his eyes set on Harlem. His plan was simple: control the drug trade, expand the gambling rackets, and eventually replace Bumpy as the undisputed king of Harlem. Bumpy's spies, those loyal to him in the shadows, had already begun to report the movements of Big Sal and his men. The Mafia was making offers to the local businesses, bribing the cops, and even trying to pull Bumpy's closest allies away from him. It was a slow burn, a war of attrition designed to weaken him from within. And for the first time in a long while, Bumpy felt vulnerable. The fight for Harlem had always been a matter of power, but now it was a matter of survival. Bumpy couldn't afford to lose. Not to the Mafia, and certainly not to the men who had once called him their leader, but he wasn't going to let that happen. Bumpy had been in tough situations before. He knew the game, and he knew how to play it. He would need to be strategic. He would need to call in his allies, men he had earned the loyalty of over the years. And he would need to make a move that would send a message to both the Mafia and the people of Harlem. It was time to show them who was truly in charge. The tension reached a boiling point one cold evening in late November when Bumpy received word that Big Sal DiCarlo had arrived in Harlem, along with a group of armed men making their presence known. It wasn't a subtle move. It was a declaration. Big Sal wasn't just here to make deals. He was here to claim what he believed was rightfully his. Bumpy knew this was the moment that would determine whether Harlem remained his, or whether the Mafia would carve it up and take everything he had built. The time for negotiation was over. Now, it was all about confrontation. Bumpy's mind raced as he made his way to the meeting point, a rundown warehouse near the docks, where Big Sal and his men had set up camp. The streets of Harlem were quiet, almost too quiet, as Bumpy's men moved silently through the shadows. His circle was tight, his loyal men always at his back. In a world where trust was earned with blood, Bumpy's loyalty ran deep, and he knew he could count on his allies. As Bumpy entered the warehouse, his eyes scanned the dimly lit room, the air thick with the scent of smoke and the low murmur of conversation. Big Sal was sitting at a table surrounded by his crew, his usual confident smirk plastered on his face. "You're late, Bumpy," Big Sal called out as he leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped together. "But then again, I didn't expect you to come so willingly. I thought you'd put up more of a fight." Bumpy didn't answer immediately. He stood tall, his presence commanding the room as he walked forward. He had faced worse men than Big Sal, and he wasn't about to let some outsider dictate the future of Harlem. "I don't like people telling me what I can and can't do in my own territory," Bumpy finally said, his voice calm but filled with authority. Big Sal chuckled, the sound dripping with arrogance. "It's not your territory anymore, Bumpy, not if you want to survive. The Mafia has plans and it's time you accepted that." Bumpy stepped closer, his gaze locked on Big Sal. "You think you can walk in here and take what I've built? You think you can push me around like one of your lackeys?" There was no more humor in Big Sal's eyes. He leaned forward, the tension in the air thickening. "This is how it's gonna go, Bumpy. You'll either work with us, or we'll take it all from you. No more games, no more back and forth. Harlem belongs to us now." Bumpy's jaw tightened. His fingers flexed, the calm demeanor hiding the fury that was bubbling beneath the surface. He had been in moments like this before. He had been pushed to the edge, had been tested, but he always came out on top. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't about territory. This was about respect, and Bumpy was prepared to fight for it. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a small silver cigarette case. With the flick of his wrist, he opened it, lit a cigarette, and took a slow drag. His eyes never left Big Sal's. "You've got one chance to walk away, Sal," Bumpy said, his voice low, steady, and unyielding. "I'm not asking. I'm telling you. You can leave Harlem, or I'll make sure the only thing you'll remember about this place is how it felt to lose everything." Big Sal's men began to shift, their hands hovering near their weapons. But they didn't move just yet. They were waiting for Sal's lead. Big Sal's eyes flared with anger, but he kept his cool. He wasn't about to show weakness. "Get this straight, Bumpy," Big Sal said, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. "You can't intimidate me. The Mafia runs New York, and we're done with you running things in Harlem. This is your last warning. Either you get on board, or we'll take your empire piece by piece." For a moment, the room was silent. It was a standoff, both men sizing each other up, the tension almost unbearable. Every word exchanged now would decide the future of Harlem. Bumpy stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. He had no intention of backing down. "If you want Harlem, you'll have to take it from me, Sal. But you won't leave here standing, not today, not ever." The words hung in the air, heavy with promise, and then, in an instant, it all exploded. Bumpy's men, waiting in the shadows, sprang into action. Shots rang out in rapid succession, the air thick with the sound of violence. But Bumpy was already moving, faster than anyone could anticipate. He drew his gun, aiming it with precision at the closest of Big Sal's men. One shot, one clean kill. The room erupted in chaos, but Bumpy was calm. He was a man who had seen it all before, and he knew exactly how to handle himself in the middle of a firefight. Big Sal and his men tried to retaliate, but they were outgunned. In a matter of minutes, Bumpy's crew had neutralized the threat, and Big Sal's men were on the ground, their weapons useless. Big Sal stood frozen, his face now pale, the arrogance replaced by fear. He looked at Bumpy, his lips trembling. "You can't do this, Bumpy. You'll pay for this. The Mafia won't let you." Bumpy cut him off, the gun still aimed at Sal's chest. "You're done, Sal, and you're going to walk out of here with nothing. Your plan failed." Big Sal's eyes flicked to the door, to his men lying incapacitated, and then back at Bumpy. He realized then that his reign in Harlem was over. With one swift motion, Bumpy lowered the gun and walked away, his men following behind. As Bumpy and his men stepped out into the cold Harlem night, the sound of gunfire still echoed in their ears. The warehouse was silent now, save for the faint groan of the injured and the occasional rustle of movement as the last of Big Sal's men were disarmed and secured. Bumpy didn't look back. There was no need. The battle was over, and he had won. The message had been sent loud and clear to both the Mafia and anyone else who thought they could walk into his territory and challenge him. The streets of Harlem, once tense with the knowledge that the Mafia was trying to stake its claim, now buzzed with a different kind of energy. Word would spread fast, too fast for Big Sal to recover. Harlem was Bumpy's, and the Mafia had just learned the hard way that there was no room for outsiders in his empire. As Bumpy made his way down the sidewalk, his crew at his back, he could feel the eyes of Harlem on him. People in the shadows, watching from windows, from the corners of the street, they had seen the power struggle unfold, and they knew who had come out on top. A man approached Bumpy as he walked, a familiar face from the neighborhood. He tipped his hat in respect, offering a nod. Bumpy stopped, his eyes flicking toward him, a silent acknowledgement of the man's gesture. "That was a hell of a thing, Bumpy," the man said, his voice low but with admiration. "You showed him who's boss." Bumpy gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "It's not about being boss," he replied quietly. "It's about respect. This is my home. You don't take that from me, not without a fight." The man, understanding, tipped his hat again and walked off into the night, leaving Bumpy to his thoughts. Bumpy didn't revel in violence or chaos. It was a means to an end, a way to protect the only thing that mattered, the people of Harlem and the empire he had built. As the night carried on, the fallout of the confrontation with Big Sal began to unfold. Harlem's underworld would shift, but Bumpy's position as the true ruler of the streets was no longer in question. His actions would be remembered as the moment the Mafia learned that they could not simply walk into Harlem and take control. They had underestimated Bumpy's reach, and that was a mistake that wouldn't soon be forgotten. Back in the warehouse, the Mafia's plans had been shattered. Big Sal's men, now either neutralized or sent running, would have no choice but to regroup. But the Mafia wasn't done. Bumpy knew that. There would be other attempts, other power plays, but he would be ready. He always was. But for now, Harlem was his. The events of that night, the attack on Big Sal's men, the destruction of the Mafia's plan to take over Harlem, would reverberate throughout the streets of the city. By the time the sun rose, word had spread like wildfire. Bumpy Johnson had stood his ground against the Mafia and emerged victorious. The man who had once been seen as an outsider in Harlem was now indisputably its king. In the days that followed, Harlem's respect for Bumpy solidified. He wasn't just a gangster. He was a symbol of resilience, of power, and of unwavering loyalty to the people who called Harlem home. The Mafia had tried to make a power play, to impose their will on Harlem, but Bumpy had shut them down. For Harlem's residents, this was more than just another victory for Bumpy. It was a reminder of who ruled the streets. The people who had lived in the shadow of the Mafia for years now looked to Bumpy as their protector, their leader. He was the man who had stood up to the outsiders and said no, and that was a message that resonated deeply in the heart of Harlem. Bumpy's status as a legend was now undeniable. The word untouchable took on a new meaning in Harlem. He wasn't just untouchable by his enemies, he was untouchable by the forces that sought to control him, to control his community. He had earned his place not through fear alone, but through respect. He had proved that loyalty, both to his people and to the city, was more important than money or power. But Bumpy knew that the streets never stayed calm for long. The Mafia might have been dealt a blow, but they weren't the only threat. Harlem was a place where power constantly shifted, where alliances were formed and broken. Bumpy was always ready, always prepared. His victory over the Mafia was just another chapter in a long war for control. As Harlem settled into the rhythm of life again, the legend of Bumpy Johnson continued to grow. He had defeated one of the most dangerous forces in the underworld, and in doing so, he had solidified his place as the true king of Harlem. This wasn't just about territory. This wasn't even about money. This was about respect. Bumpy Johnson's stand against the Mafia wasn't just a victory for him. It was a victory for the streets that had raised him, for the community that had always stood by him. In a world where loyalty was often betrayed and power was taken by force, Bumpy had proven that the true strength of a man came from his ability to protect what mattered most. Harlem would always change, and the struggles would never cease. But Bumpy's place in its history was secure. He had faced the Mafia at its most dangerous and had shown the world that no matter the threat, he was unbreakable. In the end, it wasn't just the people who feared Bumpy Johnson. It was the outsiders, the ones who tried to control Harlem without understanding it. In a world of shifting allegiances and constant betrayal, Bumpy Johnson had one thing the Mafia couldn't touch: the loyalty of his people and the respect he had earned through a lifetime of fighting for his community. And that respect would be the foundation of his legendary status for years to come. The story of Bumpy Johnson's stand against the Mafia wasn't just about one man's victory over a rival. It was a turning point that would define the future of Harlem. In a world where power often shifted like sand beneath one's feet, where loyalty could be bought and sold, Bumpy Johnson had shown the world what true strength looked like. It wasn't the power of violence, though he was more than capable of it. It wasn't the riches or the criminal empire he had built. No, the true power that Bumpy wielded was the power of respect, the unwavering loyalty he commanded from those who followed him. He ruled not with fear, but with a code that kept his community together, that made them stand with him, not against him. In the streets of Harlem, the name Bumpy Johnson became synonymous with authority, but it was an authority earned, not imposed. When the Mafia sought to undermine him, they learned what it meant to challenge a man who would protect his own with everything he had. But the lesson didn't just apply to them. It was a message to anyone who thought they could walk into Harlem, take control, and push Bumpy aside. Harlem belonged to its people, and Bumpy was the one who would ensure it stayed that way. This wasn't just about one man's pride. It was about a community's dignity. Harlem had always been a place of resilience, but now it had its protector, a legend whose actions would echo in the streets for decades. And sometimes it takes a legend to remind the world what respect really means. Bumpy Johnson's victory over the Mafia wasn't just a moment in time. It was the foundation of his legacy. A legacy that would outlast the battles, the betrayals, and the tests that lay ahead. For Harlem, he was more than just a criminal kingpin. He was a symbol of defiance, of loyalty, and of the unbreakable bond between a man and his community. His legend would live on, not through the empire he built, but through the respect and loyalty he earned. In the end, Bumpy Johnson didn't just carve out a place for himself in the streets of Harlem. He carved out a place for the very soul of the community, and that, more than any territory or wealth, would be his true legacy.